Um, Hi everyone. Thank you for joining. Well, thank you for anyone who's watching this recording and for Doreen who's here. We're going to start our week 8 Webflow workshop lesson. This week, as I said in the email, we are doing Introduction to Webflow Interactions. So understanding Webflow's interaction panel, creating simple hover effects and like button animations, page scroll animations as well, and any other animation I can think of if we have time. And then the homework, if you have time, is to animate a hero section and add your own animations. Doesn't have to just be hover effects, can be anything that you want. So last week we actually covered advanced layouts in Webflow, and we built this hero section. Oh, actually, not advanced layout, sorry, positioning. So we covered the different kinds of positioning, etc. And then that's alongside what we're learning today. We'll kind of show you how you can create really cool and interesting effects in Webflow. So before we start today's lesson, Doreen had shared the work that she did, which is rebuilding an existing um, one pager. So this is the page that she used as reference, and she was recreating it in Webflow. So, oh, it's not even open yet. Let me reload. So as I've mentioned like a few times, rebuilding things in Webflow is a really great way of practicing how to build different layouts. I think Squarespace is actually a really good place to get very straightforward examples that you can then rebuild. So I would highly recommend using Squarespace. And if we're doing, so let me just, okay, so this is the original. If I go to Doreen's, before I even look at the actual workflow layer structure, immediately I can tell that this is really good. The layout and the way that the different sections are structured is good. The typography matches, the sizing and everything is similar to the original website. One thing the original website had, which I thought was good because it would allow you to learn how to do this, is very non-conventional layout. So, like this is text here and then an image and then another image and then empty space. Like it's not a standard layout, so it's good practice. So I can see here that Doreen did a good job of trying to replicate this design. It looks great. We have our text here, image, our grid here, etc. Here, was this a scrolling marquee? Okay, yeah, this is a scrolling marquee. And then we have this section, which is small text. I wonder why this website is actually built this way. It's a very strange design. So good. I mean, this is really good overall. It's not exactly the same, but it doesn't have to be. The point is that you kind of build an understanding of how to create these different sections. So if I go into the structure, one thing I will note is you'll see that sometimes, well, I guess not on this, but for example, here, there's a bit of space here, so I can scroll to the right in order to avoid that. So if we go down, we can see this is the reason why. Because this heading it has a fixed width, when the screen becomes too small, then the heading starts to overlap with the section because it's bigger than the section now. So for example, if I go to preview and I try to shrink down my screen, you'll see now it goes outside of the section and then it creates this white empty space here. So in order to avoid that, what you can do is this heading cannot have a fixed width using REM or pixels. However, you can give it a width of VW. And basically VW will resize as the screen resizes. So it'll become bigger as the screen becomes bigger, like this, for example, and then smaller as the screen becomes smaller. And I think that's the best way to do this kind of um, layout where your text is responsive as well. So that was the one thing I'd recommend. The other thing is I was quickly going through earlier the design and the layout is really good. The section, the padding, the container looks great. Really good work on that. The only thing is still the classes for typography. So for example, this is H5, but we don't, I mean, you can have it be H5, but in that case, you just want to make sure that you update the naming. So heading H5 or something. Or alternatively, if remember with heading classes or any text classes, you don't need to actually give it a class if you don't want. You can use the HTML tag and then change it that way. But if you do need to give it a class, then just make sure that how you've named the class matches the rest of your um, website or the rest of your structure. Same with paragraph. Paragraph is fine, but always good to add some more context. So is this like default text size? Is this large text size? Is this, what is it? Because then later on, when you see this class, you'll know, okay, this is the default text size, or this is the large text size. Actually, I think large is already there. This is the medium. Okay, medium's already there too. This is, whatever text size. So that is the other thing that I wanted to mention. And so you can even see here, for example, this is heading 10, which probably means there were a lot of different headings. This is heading 9, but I think this and this are actually the same. So that's why you want to be careful with the heading classes where you're not duplicating the same thing, but it has a lot of different names. It should be consistent. Is this heading 2 or heading 3, heading 4, etc. Uh, Same with button. I mean, this can, I think, I, I don't know why it's button two, but if it is button two, that's fine. You can just make sure that the way that you've written the class name matches the rest of your site. But otherwise, for the most part, this is really good. This heading also, I think this is actually similar to the one down here. So we'll give it that same sizing. So we'll say 19 VW so that it doesn't overlap with this section. And that means as it becomes bigger, it'll become bigger. And then as the screen shrinks, it'll become smaller. So that's something to keep in mind. Noreen, any questions when you were doing this?
Yes, I
Yeah.
saw last time you are doing like you are changing I think the typography. Then you are
Mm,
using those HTML tags,
mm,
those pink ones.
mm-hmm,
Now, I did that in the beginning for the
mm-hmm,
heading because the font used for the heading is the same but very different to the one that was used for paragraphs.
mm-hmm,
So for the heading, I clicked body
mm-hmm,
and then I changed like the HTML tags. I think I
mm-hmm,
changed only, yes, the body. Yes, I changed it.
mm-hmm,
But then what about the HTML tags for headings?
mm-hmm.
Do we do the same as the body ones or how do you go about that?
Yeah, so for headings, like for example, normally in your style guides, if your heading is a different font from your body, so like your
Okay,
body is into in your style guide for these pink heading classes, you would just go
okay.
in, select the pink tag, and then make them the necessary heading. I don't know what it is for the body. So you do that for all of them. Make sure you don't
Yeah, it's
give
that
it,
one. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. Make sure you
Oh,
don't give it a class name, otherwise it'll keep making class names over and over and over again. You want to remove any class name and then select the pink one. So now this will apply to all
okay.
two headings, and then you can update that way. Same with heading 3. Select all H3 headings, and then you can update the heading class. Same with this.
Oh,
Yeah, and all of them. So that's how I normally update the heading. So that means anytime you add a heading, it will have the right font because you set it using the HTML tags.
thank you so much. Also, I've seen like uh, the may you preview it again? This mine is scroll down,
Mm-hmm.
scroll. Yes, you see here we are a company. No, stop. This
Yeah.
section, this lady, you see now how the font have like spacing. If you check the original one, it's very different from this mine.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, you see how it is. How do you do that?
Like for it to stretch.
Yes, like what the way I did, I just added like padding that for my screen it looked okay, but then I've seen if you, I think your screen is much larger than mine.
Mm-hmm.
You see how awkward it looks.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah.
for this, I think the reason, so it, what am I doing? Mhm. Let me see. Okay. So the reason why is because it was centered. So it was aligned in middle here, which means that it was always going to be contained in the middle. If you wanted it to stretch until the almost the edge of the container,
Yeah.
when you select the parent layer, instead
Mm-hmm.
of center, you just click stretch. So now you can see even in this that it's now stretching to the edge. And then to add this spacing, you can just use padding to add whatever spacing that
Oh,
you want. Then when you preview, you can see it stretches till the end. But then the other thing is for your button too. Should tell you where your button.
yeah.
You
I
just
have
want to make
put
sure
a
it makes
lot
the
of
line
padding.
center. Where?
Okay.
Ah, yeah. Well, you don't need to because
Yeah,
because
just to stretch.
yeah,
Yeah.
to make it big. Okay, yeah, I get what you mean. Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense. Not a bad idea, but you also want to align it in the middle because if you don't, you'll see that it's a bit off to the left. So you want to also
Okay.
make sure alignment is in the middle. And then for your text, instead of doing the
Mm-hmm.
space,
Mm-hmm.
the problem with the space is that actually I think you made it responsive, so it's fine. If you make the screen too small and it goes on two line, it starts to look weird.
Mm-hmm.
However, what you can do is just have two different headings and then use flex to separate them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so let's
Okay.
say this is
Okay.
my first heading, and then this is my second
That's it.
heading, and then I make
Mm-hmm.
them flex,
You love.
and I
Mm-hmm.
to, if you double click, it does the
Spacing.
stretch. So now,
Yeah.
yeah, space in between. So you achieve the same effects, but you don't
Sure.
need to add like many spaces for it.
Sure. And about the heading, above the same lady. Yes. There.
This one,
Yes.
actually don't. I think the way you done it, maybe. Well, actually, let me see. Okay, this one, as you resize, it seems like the text also resizes.
Mm-hmm.
As yours, let me see. As you resize, it goes to a new line. So I think, I'm not sure, but I think they maybe use like how I said VW for this so that it's
Mm-hmm.
either increases in size with the user screen. You can do the same with this.
Okay.
So you can make it like whatever, 4.5 VW so that the layout is the same consistent. Like even as you resize, it'll become smaller
Ah,
instead of
yeah,
going to a
sure.
new line. Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm. Any other questions?
And last question.
Yeah.
There. You see, like just below the rotate, the hero section on the
Mm-hmm.
left, we are rotate studio less dance. You see that cut space.
Mm.
How how can I increase it if I want to? Maybe if I'm doing another website.
Mm-hmm.
and then maybe the spacing between one section to another is big. How can I
Okay,
increase?
this one on top here.
Yes, yeah.
Or you can use padding small, or did you use padding small because this is supposed to be small space?
Yeah, I think so. I no, I don't know. In the original, actually, there is a lot of space.
Yeah, so if the amount of space on the top of and bottom is supposed to be the same, then you can just increase the size
Mhm.
here and it will. Oh, you're saying yours doesn't increase? Oh, I think because you had changed. Okay, padding vertical. If I remove this, because it's
Mhm.
supposed to be 0 until you add a size, and then I add,
Mhm.
say, extra large. Oops. Now you can see it adds
Okay.
space
Yeah.
that's equal on top and the bottom. Yeah.
Yeah. Sure. Sure.
Otherwise, good.
Yeah. I think. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, great. But honestly, really good work. This is good. You can even use this to add. I think you added some interactions for the button anyway that I saw.
This
How
with
many?
this one.
Oh wait, or was that the? Oh, that's the.
This
That's the.
is that was the original one. Yeah. Maybe I can add the
Yeah, you can add.
interactions.
It's not
Yeah.
very hard. So let's quickly cover interactions. So let's start with the interaction panel. So when you have your Webflow design and you want to start adding interactions, there are actually two ways to add interactions. The first is by adding them through the interaction panel. And the second way is by adding them by clicking the element directly. So for example, this is a button. Right now it has no interaction when I hover over the button. But let's say I want to change the color when I hover over it. You can still do this through the interactions panel, but for very simple, straightforward style interactions, you don't need to use the interaction panel. You can just do it through the style panel. So here on style, I there's this arrow with a drop down. When you click that drop down, you can see their different states. So these are the different states, not just for buttons, but for any element in Webflow. So there's a state which is the default, the none state. There's hover, which I'm sure you understand is how the element will look when the user hovers over it. There's pressed, which is how it will look when the user presses. So if you imagine you have like a mouse and you click on something, once you clicked that click effect, you can create an additional state for how the button should behave or how anything should behave. There's focused, which is mostly for use it for like form fields. So if somebody's typing in a specific form field, the field can like change the border color so that it highlights it and shows the user that they are currently typing that field. There's also focused keyboard, which is da-da-da, like it says in the description, the state emulates focus on an interactive element. So in the same way you might focus using your mouse, this is the state if you focus using your keyboard. And then there's visited, which, for example, if you browse a page and you go back sometimes, especially with Google links, actually, the heading of the links that you visited are usually purple, just to show that you have visited that page before. So this is similar to that if you needed to add an effect in that way. So because it's a button and we want a hover effect, we'll select hover. So you see it adds this green combo tag to it. Now that it's hover, we are now editing the hover state of the button. So, like I said, we wanted to change colors. So on hover, I want my button to turn purple, and maybe I want my text to be completely white instead of the peach color it was before. That's all I have to do. Now that I'm done doing that, I can click this X to remove this tag and go back to the default, or I can click my drop down and go back to none. And you see now that I've gone back to the none, which is my default, my button goes back to what it looks like normally. But if I go back to hover again, I can see that it's has the changes I made previously. So let me go back to none. Another thing you'll notice is that if you add any changes to these states, you will see that there's like this purple but dot here, just to let you know that for these states, you have made updates to them as a reminder. So now, even in our preview, we can see that it's already taking effect. So on hover, the color of my button changes, which is what we want. But this hover effect is very abrupt. So it's like there's no ease or there's no like fade, which is very common with, buttons. For example, Luma, I mean, I don't know if you can really see because this is actually hard, but it turns to like a slightly gray shade instead of white. But instead of it being automatic or instant, there's like a slight fade. So we want there to be a slight fade for our interaction. How we do that is very simple. So we select our button again, and we're not on hover state, we're on the default state. And here you can see there is under effect, so all the way at the bottom of the style panel, there's something called transitions. So transitions, when you click it, you can add a transition duration and easing for any style change that you've added. So anytime you add um, different styles to any of these other states, you can come back to the default state and add a transition, which just dictates how quickly and how smoothly the transition takes place. So in this case, normally for something like button hovers, first thing you select what is the state that you have changed. So if we go back to our hover, we can see, and the other thing that Webflow does to also remind you is because if you're doing maybe a bit more complex interaction, you might even forget what you've changed, but it highlights the changes you made in blue. So this lets me know, okay, I changed the color and I changed the background color and the text color, but all these other orange tags indicate that no changes were made on the hover state. So background color and font color is what I've changed. Now, if I go back to my default state here under transitions, I need to select those two properties because those are the ones that I changed for my button in the hover state. So the first one is background color. I'm going to leave the duration and easing as it is. You can make it faster or slower as you'd want. And then you have to add a second one, which is the text color. So that's under typography, font color. Now you can see even in preview, you can see now there's this soft fade in effect for the color. It's not abrupt like it was before, it's more gradual. And like I said, you can make it faster or slower depending on, what you want. So this is let me see, I wanted to also do an interaction. Okay. So this is not just for hover effects. It can literally be for anything, honestly. So for example, let's say I want to add a something for this particular item. And I'm actually going to give it a fixed height so that it does what I want it to do. So I'm going to select my nav logo 2, and instead of hover, I'm going to have a different interaction, which is, let's say, pressed. Actually, don't do pressed interactions, so I'm curious how it'll work. So on pressed, I want this to rotate like 360. That's what we're gonna go for. So before I update, oh, okay, I'm in the press state, so I'm going to click my press state. I'm gonna go for any rotation changes you want. It's under 2D and 3D transforms. So there's move, there's scale, there's rotate, there's skew. Rotate is the one we want, and we want it to rotate 360 degrees, which you can see doesn't have a change because this means it's back to its original place, but that's what we want. If I go back to my default state, I also want to add a transition. So the transition for 2D and 3D transforms is here, transform. So any, whether it's movement or scale or rotate, all of that falls under transform. So that's the one that we want. Now, if I go in preview, right now there's no effect because this is hover. Remember, we set the effect for click, but if I click this, we can see that it rotates. And as soon as you let go, it goes back to its default because this interaction or this style interaction only happens when the person has clicked on it. But as soon as you unclick on your mouse, it goes back to its default state. So that's just another kind of interaction that you had. And obviously there's so many, basically anything on the style panel, almost anything on the style panel, you can customize and change according to different states and use interactions that way. So that's the straightforward way of adding interactions. But if you want more complex interactions, then you have your interactions panel. So let's say, for example, what interaction would I want to add here? Okay, let's say I want to add an interaction to this. So on my interaction panel, you can see that there are two kinds of interactions, element triggers and page triggers. So it gives you a description of what each one is. So an element trigger, you select an element, and then you add an animation that activates according to that element. And the page trigger is an animation triggered by a change pages in the page's state, sorry. So we'll start with element triggers. If I click this plus icon, it gives me a few different options of, the kind of interaction I want. So there's mouse click tap, there's mouse hover, there's mouse move over element, there's scrolling to view, and there's while scrolling into view. And then you can see here there are four more options, but these are not available because they only are available if you are adding animations to specific elements. So navbar opens, you can only add if you are adding animation to your navigation. So you have to actually select your navigation first. Drop down is the same, only for drop downs. Tabs is only for tabs and sliders only for sliders. That's why they're hidden now because we just selected a random div. So we can only add any of these default animations to it. So let's say, for example, we've already done hover, but I'm going to do hover again just to show you how it would work if you are doing it from the interactions panel. And this is if you want to make a more complex hover interaction. Like let's say if I hover over this, I want something to happen to the button. Obviously, you can't do that through the default style panel because in the style panel, you can only change the state of the element you have selected. But through the interactions panel, you can change anything on the page. So if I hover over this, I can affect this, I can affect this, I can affect anything else on the page. That's one of the main reasons you would use the interactions panel. So now that I had it hover, you can see there are a couple of other things that have appeared. So first is it's prompting you to add an action on hover. So when you hover over the element and also on hover out, which is when you move away from the element. And then there's some trigger settings, which basically asks you, when do you want this animation to occur? Do you want it to occur on all screen sizes, on all devices? But you can also choose like, I only want it to happen on mobile, or I only want it to happen on desktop. So you can choose which devices you want this to appear on. And the last thing is element or class. This just basically says sometimes, for example, let's say if you have a button animation that is a bit complex, so you've added it in here, you can choose, if you choose element, that means that this interaction will only apply to the selected element, so only to this one button. But let's say if you have a big website with ton of different buttons and they all need to have the same interaction. Instead of manually clicking each one and adding the same interaction to it, you can just go into the main one and select class. And this will trigger this interaction on all elements with the same class. So all elements with this class, this animation will trigger. So I think we're using this. Yeah. I'll leave it as element for now, and then I'll show you when we click class, it'll also apply to here, basically anywhere where we have hero text as a class, it'll activate. But for now, we'll leave it on element. So let's add our hover interaction. So under select action, you can see you can create a custom animation, and then you can also choose from a bunch of different animations. So you can explore those. But in this case, we'll create a custom animation. So it opens this dialog and basically tells you we have no animations right now because this is a new site. We're gonna click the plus icon to add an animation, and then you can give it a name. So now you can see there's this empty menu and it gives you a prompt where it asks you to add an animation. So keep in mind that we have selected hero text, and on the layers panel, you can even see it has this lightning bolt icon to let you know that this is the trigger for the interaction. So it's easy to visualize in your head. When I hover over this, what do I want to happen? So first thing is, let's say we want to change the color of this div block. So we select it on our layers panel, or you can even select it on the page itself, and we click plus to add an interaction. So you can see there are a couple of different interactions, and we want to change the background color. So we select background color, and when you select or add an action, it opens up this menu here where you can then choose what you want to happen. So in this case, background color, you need to choose what background color you want it to change to. So I want it to change to, let's say, let me make it green. Okay, so I want it to change to green when I hover over it. Here's where you can also change the ease. You can explore these ones to see how that works, or you can change the duration. You can add a delay to the animation, etc., etc. So let's say I want to change the background color and then also the text color because now it's too bright if it's that green. I want to make my text this green. So I have affected the background color and the text color. So let's say preview. So we go in preview and we put our mouse on top and we can see the change happens, which is exactly what we want. The other thing I will say is there's this checkbox here, which is set as initial state. And this basically means, well, the description explains it, setting initial state applies styles to the element before page load. So in this case, it doesn't matter. We don't need to add an initial state because the style that we've added to to our text box as it is how I want it to appear initial. So initial basically means on page load. How should things look? This is how we want things to look on page load. But let's say, for example, we wanted an element to be invisible, so opacity 0, or I wanted an element to be off screen, or I wanted it to look a certain way. But on the designer, we have styled it where we can see the element or its appearance is different. You don't have to style in the designer how it looks on initial because sometimes that can be complicated. Like if you want this to be moved from off screen to on screen, you can style it in designer to be off screen to begin with, but then when it comes to editing or customizing the element later on, it can be tricky because you have to keep bringing it back onto screen and then putting off screen, on screen, off screen. So it can be complicated. So sometimes the best way to do it is to, on your interaction, you can have the element on screen, but you will create a separate so for example, if I click this set as initial state, like if I want on designer right now, as I've designed my website, this is purple. But let's say when the page loads, like the live version of the page, I actually want it to be blue, or actually the blue is pretty similar. I want it to be yellow, purple. So I've set that initial screen there. But if I go back to my designer, for instance, this is still purple because in the designer, if we go back, we have given it the color purple. But on the live version of my site, I know on page load, I want it to start off being a darker purple. So if I preview, I can see it starts as a darker purple, even though in the designer, it is this lighter purple. And that's because we added that initial state here. We said on it on page load, we want the initial color to be purple, regardless of how it looks like on the designer. So hopefully that helps clarify how initial state works. It's important to understand because it is sometimes very essential and useful, and you'll use it a lot. If I haven't explained it properly, of course, you can still look into that more. But in this case, we don't need it, so we're going to remove it. So this is how we've styled. And then, like I mentioned, you can also affect other elements. So let's say I want my hero button background to also change when I hover over this text. So I can select my hero button and I can go here and add an interaction for, let's say, background color. And I can make that interaction, let's say, a light shade of red. And you can see there's even the icon is different. This lightning icon, and it tells you means that it's affecting the trigger. The trigger is the element that we are adding this interaction to, which is in this text box. And then this blue icon here is telling you that we are affecting a class on the page. In this case, the class is this button class. When you select affect, it can give you more options of what you can change. So maybe you only want to affect one specific element. You can choose that. But if you're affecting multiple elements, then you would select class and then it allows you to type in what class you're selecting. In this case, it's the hero button. The other thing is you can also choose when you do use class, there are different ways to affect the class. This is, I think I'll cover in, actually, I can cover it now. 'Cause next week, we're also going to go over interactions. There's a lot to do with it. It's hard to cover in one lesson. But when you click this drop down, you can see that you have different options for interaction. So when you say class, for example, hero button, in this case, it's selected only siblings with this class element. Or you can choose only children with this class element, only parents, all elements with this class. So I think will cover this next week because it needs a bit more explanation. So just bear that in mind that we will discuss it in the next session. For now, we'll leave it as is. So if we save and we go back, we can see on hover, this changes and also our button changes too. So this changes and the color of our button changes is what we want. But you notice when we remove our mouse and we go off hover, it doesn't go back to its default. And that's because we haven't added our on hover out animation. I'm going to add a new animation and I'm actually just going to take this and duplicate it because we're using the same elements anyway. So it cuts down on how much work. And we can say this is button hover out. So we want our hero text to go back to being, well, I actually don't even remember what color it was before. Let's just say blue. We want the background text of this element to be red. And we want our text color to be, I don't even know what it was before, but let me just say dark blue, right? Actually, let me add those colors here so it's more disjointed. Okay. So now, and we hover, we can see we hover in, changes, hover out, goes back to normal, in, changes, out, goes back to normal. And so that's how you'd add an interaction via the interactions panel. Now you can see this is only applying to this one text box. If I go down, it doesn't apply to any of them. And that's because, like I mentioned before, we've only set it to apply to the elements that we've added it to. But if we set it to class, that means this interaction will activate on all elements of the page that have the same class. So now if I preview, I can see it works on our initial element and it works on all other elements on the page. So that's the difference between affecting an element versus affecting a class. So this was just a simple mouse hover animation, but like I mentioned, you can add a ton of different animations in Webflow. So let's try adding a different kind of animation. Let's say we want a, yeah, let's say we want a scroll into view animation. So I'm going to select my hero section and I'm going to click the plus icon and I want to add an animation while scrolling to view. This basically means, like the description says, what happens, it's an animation when an element scrolls into view. So when this hero section scrolls into view, what animation do I want? In this case, it's a bit nonsensical because on page load, you already have this section in view. It's not like you have to scroll to see this section, but for the sake of the practicing, we're still gonna move forward with it. So you can see scrolling to view has slightly different options. So it asks you to add an action when scrolled into view and also an action when scrolled out of view. So that's what we're going to do. So when scrolled into view, we want to add a custom animation. We'll click the plus icon, scroll into view. And let's say we want this button to start off screen and to come on screen. So remember what we talked about before. So we're going to select our button and we're going to add a move animation instead. So we want it to move. Basically, we want it to go from off screen. So let's say up here, and we want it to fall into its place right now. So actually, we don't need to add, you can see with movement, there are like three movement options: X axis, Y axis, and Z axis. So in this case, we're using Y axis because we're moving it from up to down. We are going to add 0 rem because we want the final destination for the button to be exactly where it is. However, we're going to add a new move class for the button, and this is going to be the initial state. So where we want our button to start from. And we want our button to start from, make it rem again, a bit higher. So we want it to start from up there. And once it starts from up there, then it'll move into place here. One thing I didn't cover before is that you can also preview animations right here. You don't have to go all the way here and preview. I like to, because I don't know, I just prefer to see it on the preview mode, but you can also preview your interactions here. So if I click play, I can see how my animation works. So it goes from top to bottom. If I preview here, we can see the same thing. So once the element goes into view, our button goes from top to bottom. Now, you can, like I said, you can add a delay, you can change the duration. I want to show you guys how easing works. Easing is something I think I definitely recommend looking into because it just means how the interaction happens. The best way to illustrate it is right now we have a gradual, top to bottom, like very standard. But let's say we want there to be a bit of a bounce. There are a lot of different bounce options here. There's bounce, bounce past, Because I've used animations in Webflow a lot, I know some of the others that also have a bounce effect, hence why I recommend exploring all these. Autoelastic also has a bounce effect. If I preview, you can see that's what it looks like. It's very dramatic. Some of the easing options can be very dramatic, and you can usually counter that by just increasing the duration. Like if I made that 3 seconds and I previewed, you can see it's not as bad as it was before. So if I preview now, I can see my button appears. Now, I think it appearing instantly is a bit dramatic, so we can actually give it a delay of maybe 0.5 seconds. Just basically means, remember, when this section is scrolled into view, which is automatically since it's the second section on the page, there'll be a 0.5-second delay and then our button will appear. So if I preview, delay, and then a button appears, which is different from before where it appeared instantly, right? And that's exactly what we want. So hopefully that helps explain how this initial state works. I could, in the designer, position the button up there to begin with, so I don't have to use initial state, but then it makes it harder to play around and customize the button later on because it's off screen. So initial state is very useful in these occasions where you want your elements to be doing something completely different before they animate in the way that you want. So I'm gonna save that. And then you can also add a scrolled out of view animation. So for example, if I scroll down and I want my button to like disappear again, or I want something else to happen, this basically means when you scroll out of this section. That's another thing to remember and like not confuse yourself on. We added an interaction to this section. However, which is the scroll interaction, and then we animated the button. So when it says here when scroll out of view, it's not referring to the button, it's referring to when you scroll out of view of the section. So the section ends here. When you scroll away from the section, what will happen? What will animate? Okay. One other thing with scroll animations is also you get an offset. This basically means sometimes, for example, when you're scrolling, like if I use this as an example, right? And I wanted these images to animate in like fade in or whatever. So right now they can fade in immediately, like as soon as this section comes into view, they fade in. But maybe you want there to be a bit of a buffer, like until I reach like 50%, like here is when the images should fade in. You can use that, you can apply that, oops, wrong page, using the offset, sorry. So the more that you increase, the more of a delay there will be before that animation takes place. Like 50% basically means once I've scrolled 50% of the section is when this interaction should happen. So that helps also time how different animations work as well. Just to finish things off, because it's a lot of information that we have learned today. The other animation that I can show is, let's do a page trigger animation. Um, or actually, we can do page triggers next time. Maybe we can do a while scrolling in view animation or a mouse move over while mouse move over animation as well. Okay, let's do a tap animation to finish things off because I also don't want to overwhelm with a lot of information, and these other ones are a bit more complicated. So mouse tap is pretty simple. Like let's use our button again. That's what we're using. And we click a button and we add a mouse tap animation. So it defines actions that occur on first or second tap. So you get two tap interactions if you want. So we'll go on first tap and let's say we want actually, and you don't even have to do a custom animation, by the way. I mentioned there are default animations, like let's say pop, right? We preview that very so you didn't need to like build that custom, which might have been more complicated. You can just add that default animation through here. So for example, if I preview here and our button comes into view and I tap it, it has that tap animation that we want, and we added that through here. That was on first click. Like let's say on second click you wanted a different interaction, like it should jiggle on second click. Let's preview jiggle. So now what it means is that when you first click this element, it'll do that animation. When you click it the second time, it'll do the second animation. If you click it the third time, it resets. So it goes back to the first interaction and it keeps resetting like that. So you can add custom animations as well, but I just wanted to show how the default animations work, and you can still add delays to the default animations. I think we'll end it here for today. I don't know if you have any questions, Doreen. Oops.
No question. I have
Okay,
no
no.
questions.
Okay, cool. So we covered interactions today. Hover effects, button animations. We didn't cover page scroll yet because that we will cover next week. We need 2 weeks for interactions because there's a lot. But I will definitely encourage you to look at Webflow's videos as well. They probably explain in more detail how a lot of these different interactions work. And as always, practice makes perfect. When you practice adding interactions, you can, use them in a better way. So because we didn't cover everything, I would say the homework would just be to animate something simple, like a single element in Webflow, or you can do as much as you want if you're confident, but it doesn't have to be a whole, landing page or a whole website or anything like that. You can choose something simple like just a button and play around with adding animations to that or interactions to that button. But for today, we're going to end things off here. Feel free to reach out to me if you have questions. Send me your designs if you want. And yeah, thank you for watching. Let me go back and end the video.